Welcome back, traders and investors, to Benzinga's pre-market prep, brought to you by MarketFi. I'm your co-host Joel Elconin. Sitting along with me is Brianna Valesky, and she's going to be interviewing Paul Wallace. He's a performance coach and a financial trader, and a guy with one interesting background. Paul, how you doing this morning?
I'm very well, thank you, Joel and Brianna. Very well indeed, and yourselves?
We're doing well on this holiday shortened week. So I know I asked you last time we were on, but boy, you just got an incredible background and experience in the military. And can you just translate, from what you learned from your time in the military to what you're doing now?
That's a great question, Joel. My background was I was a battle manager for the Royal Air Force, sort of running the air war from either the ground or from the air. That in the 90s, the banks were kind of interested in poaching guys doing my job to go and work as traders on the bank floors. And basically, a lot of it is because of it was deemed to have very similar skill sets in terms of mental agility, the ability to operate under stress, decisiveness, the ability to be sort of disciplined and consistency in carrying out your plan. And I think those things they are actually very relevant. They're actually very, very useful for so let's say for effective trading. And I think if I was to sum it up in one thing, it's about understanding and managing risk, knowing there are times to be kind of a risk acceptant and push a position, and then there are other times to basically be very risk averse and run away bravely. So that's hopefully that's kind of summed it up in a short little sprint for you there, Joel.
Paul, we've had quite a bit of action coming out of Europe and the European Central Bank. Last week, Mario Draghi essentially saying he was open to the idea of quantitative easing. We had Michael Hewson from CMC Markets last week saying that nothing's going to change in Europe unless they make a lot of immense structural changes. So, what are your thoughts on what's going on?
I think Michael was spot on there, and I've heard him before. He's very insightful, very spot on in terms of his normal sort of analysis of the markets. I think in sort of the Europe terms, I kind of I have a kind of I'm in an interesting position in that whilst I'm British and work in London, I actually live in Dublin in Ireland, so I get basically a cross against the both the kind of the eurozone and the kind of the UK as well. And I think what we've seen in the last couple of days is some real contradicting comments about the sort of the urgency with which the ECB would need to deploy those measures that Draghi spoke about. He was it was kind of a little bit interesting in terms of the way he spoke about it. It sounded a little bit as if he was what's the word? He was a sort of not from the textbook. He was speaking a little bit from off the ranch, so to speak, and talked about those kind of that they're considering those purchases of sovereign bonds and other measures, but straight away we saw sort of contradictory comments from. I think the chap's name is Wiedmann. Wiedmann, he's the sort of the chairman of the German Bundesbank, and he's also a member of that ECB, and he was pretty quick to come out and sort of pour cold water on Draghi's proposed stimulus plan. So there's invariably, I think Dan sort of in your preceding thing talked about, you don't really know what goes on behind closed doors in terms of understanding the real operatings that are going on, and it's clear within that, let's say that within that ECB, whilst Draghi's trying to let's say go one way, there's obviously some a good deal of fraction behind closed doors in terms of how they're going to go about it. And certainly it's well known the Germans have been immensely resistant to sort of going down that route, and until Draghi kind of either gets a grip or basically there's a change in sort of the sort of legal structure by which the Bundesbank can operate. I think Draghi's going to find a good deal of resistance unless that underlying structure changes.
So you trade mostly the euro and the British pound sterling, is that correct?
Well, yeah, that's yeah, that's mostly correct. I'm in the sort of as I said, a sort of fortunate position that I get to. I get to sort of do most of my work in London, but I live in Europe, so effectively I kind of earn in sterling and spend in euros. So not surprisingly, I kind of keep a keen eye on the euro sterling rate, and also I trade it pretty actively either either for for speculation or to sort of hedge my operation. So it's definitely kind of like, say, my the currency that I keep the keenest eye on.
Paul, you're a performance coach and a financial, do it in addition to your trading. So you probably work with young traders, new traders, and old traders alike. But let's start with the newbies. What do you find are the most common mistakes new traders make?
That's that's a great question, Joel. Well, I think a good deal of it is that the sort of if I was to sum it up, it's kind of like they're overconfident but underskilled, and that's a kind of that's a kind of a dangerous place to be. Where the let's say the kind of natural human optimism bias kicks in, and despite what can be let's say challenging statistics for success, the natural human optimism bias kicks in, and people think, well, that won't happen to me. I'm going to be capable. I'm going to be able to operate within that environment. So they tend to be a little bit overconfident, and on the flip side, they tend to be a little bit underskilled, just in generally in understanding markets, and understanding the trading methods, and understanding risk management, money management, and also really in understanding themselves. So they're kind of overconfident, underskilled, leads to sort of very let's say damaging expectations. And invariably, once those expectations aren't fulfilled, that that can lead to a degree of either emotional pain and sometimes, let's say, impulsive behavior. Does that answer?
Yeah,
Does
it
that give you a little
does.
bit of?
Yeah, it does. It does. And then also just kind of going to the other end of the spectrum. Do you have people coming to you that've had periods of success and continue trading, and they've just have hit a rut in their, let's say they're not making as much money as they used to, or they're not, they're losing a little bit. What do you try and do? What's the first thing when someone comes to you in a slump? What's the first thing you try and analyze?
I think, but that's a great way you described it then. And invariably, what tends to happen, Joel, is that my phone goes once someone experiences a slump. Okay, most people, when they're doing well, they're on top of the world, they're overconfident,
They
they
don't
think they're
need
great.
Paul. They don't need
Yeah,
Paul.
exactly. But invariably, once they have a rough patch, then the phone goes, and it's kind of one of two ways. There's either, let's say, those kind of those kind of undereducated souls who are they're experiencing they've experienced some loss, and they phone me up and think that I'm actually going to get that money back for them some way. And there's a let's say there's a quick sort of level of re-education that goes on, and they need to understand about loss aversion bias, in terms of they think by calling me they're going to get that money back quickly, and I have to kind of re-educate those poor souls that's that's not the way it works. That's their, whatever you want to call it, their opportunity cost, their educational cost. That's that money has now gone, and they have to make a decision, either whether they depart the arena for good, or they actually change the way they go about operating, instead of being an amateur with a hobby, to actually moving towards being a professional with a business. And for a lot of those guys, there's an element of re-education. There's an element of just raising their awareness in terms of how were they operating. Were they operating as a little bit of a sort of a gambler, a punter, or were they really in charge of their business? Were they really on top of understanding their risk management? Were they really operating with the expectations that were achievable, rather than just wholly out of the ballpark? So invariably, it starts with a little bit of re-education, and also raising the awareness for them that if you're an active intraday trader, performance slumps, they happen. They happen to everybody, and if anybody tells you they never have one, then they're lying. When you're engaged in such an activity as, let's say, very active intraday trading, it's that's a tough performance undertaking, and you need to understand the kind of the toll of such behavior.
Okay, Paul, before we let you go, will you tell us about your site, tradingbeliefs.com, and what kind of stuff you put out there and what kind of services you offer?
Yeah, well, as I said, primarily a lot of the work I do is, when people have a little bit of a struggle, a little bit of a challenge. That's when that's when my phone goes, and they're looking for a little bit of help. Invariably, a lot of them are looking for revolution, and in fact, actually, for a lot of them, it's merely evolution. We just need to work on understanding what's the best practice they're doing, what are the things they're doing that could be developed, and what are the things they're doing that are counterproductive to their to their success as a trader. And it's I'm afraid there's no magic bullet. It's a case of sitting and working with someone and having an objective view on how they work. So I kind of I put elements about that on Trading Beliefs, and then I blog about my own trading and my own experiences on fxtraderpool.com, which just is more my kind of people can see that how I actually act and behave in the market, myself, Joel.
Okay, all right. Paul Wallace, performance coach and a trader in the markets, a great diverse background has helped him have success in the markets. Paul, thanks a lot for coming on, and we hope to speak to you again soon.
It's always a pleasure, guys. And in this shortened week, I hope you all have a great Thanksgiving holiday.
Thank you, Paul. We really appreciate that.
Take care.